The system was never built to set you free. It was built to keep you in line. It rewards obedience, punishes awareness, and keeps people chasing approval they'll never own. Most spend their lives working harder, not realizing they're only perfecting their own chains. But one man decided to see the game for what it was: not chaos, but design. He learned to watch patterns others ignored. He understood that real power doesn't come from fighting the system, it comes from knowing how it thinks. While everyone else was reacting, he was observing. While they followed rules, he was learning how rules are made. Freedom, he realized, isn't rebellion, it's understanding. He stopped explaining himself. He stopped moving out of fear and started moving with precision. Every demand, every distraction, every illusion of control became data, not pressure. The world tried to confuse him, but he no longer needed clarity from it. He found his clarity within. He didn't outwork the system, he outthought it. He learned to play its rhythm without losing his own. He understood that the true game isn't about control, it's about choice. And when you stop chasing validation, you start leading your own path. That's when freedom stops being a dream and starts becoming direction. This is not a story about rebellion, it's about intelligence. It's about staying calm in manipulation, confident in confusion, and awake in a world built to keep you asleep. He didn't break the system. He mastered himself, and the system could no longer touch him. The world often convinces you that the system is flawed, unfair, and chaotic, but that illusion is part of its design. It feeds off your belief that things are broken, so you'll spend your life trying to fix what was never meant to serve you. It's not malfunctioning. It's functioning exactly as intended to keep people predictable, distracted, and dependent. The game was never about fairness. It was about control disguised as opportunity. The system gives you just enough freedom to feel in control, but not enough to actually change anything. It keeps you moving, chasing the next promotion, the next milestone, the next validation without ever questioning who built the finish line. The idea is simple. Keep you so busy running that you forget to look up and see who's holding the stopwatch. That's how control survives, not through force, but through rhythm. You were taught to believe in structure because structure feels safe, but that safety is rented, not owned. Every rule, every system, every social norm is designed to protect the people who wrote it. The system isn't the villain. It's just the mirror of human hierarchy. It thrives on obedience, thrives on confusion, and rewards compliance disguised as success. Most people never realize they're inside a maze that congratulates them for running faster in circles. The brilliance of the system lies in its invisibility. It doesn't need to trap you physically, it traps your attention. The constant noise, endless opinions, and pressure to perform keep your focus outward. The less you notice your own patterns, the more predictable you become. Predictability is the fuel of control. Awareness is the threat. That's why distraction is the system's favorite weapon. It begins early in schools that reward memorization over curiosity, in workplaces that reward loyalty over innovation, in cultures that teach you to follow the crowd before you even learn your own direction. The system shapes minds before it shapes lives. It teaches you what to want and calls it ambition. It teaches you what to fear and calls it wisdom. You don't see the strings because they were placed before you could look for them. But once you start noticing, everything changes. You begin to see how every structure, political, financial, social, operates on patterns of manipulation. You see how emotions are leveraged as tools, how fear keeps people compliant, and how noise keeps them numb. You realize the system doesn't need to oppress you directly. It just needs to convince you that you're free while you stay inside its lanes. The truth is, the system isn't personal. It doesn't care who you are. It cares how well you fit. It rewards those who serve its rhythm and punishes those who pause to question it. The moment you start thinking differently, you step outside its comfort zone, and that's where awareness begins. Freedom starts not when you escape the system, but when you finally see it for what it is. Most people confuse success with escape. They believe that money or status will buy freedom. But even the wealthy are often prisoners of perception, enslaved by image, by the fear of losing what they've gained. The system evolves with you. It adapts to your level. It knows how to turn every new comfort into another form of control. Real freedom isn't about rising higher inside it. It's about realizing you were never supposed to stay in it. The design works because it hides behind comfort. It gives you small wins, likes, promotions, praise to make you feel valued. But those are breadcrumbs leading you deeper into dependency. The system doesn't punish through pain. It punishes through routine. The longer you repeat patterns without questioning them, the harder it becomes to imagine another way. Breaking free doesn't mean running away. It means paying attention. Awareness is the first rebellion. When you start seeing how systems influence thought through algorithms, media, trends, and culture, you stop being controlled by them. You begin to move differently, think differently, and most importantly, choose differently. You stop reacting and start designing your own rhythm. Freedom begins in observation. You can't dismantle what you don't understand. Every rule you question loses power. Every expectation you analyze loses its hold. The system thrives on unexamined living, on autopilot minds that move but never look. The moment you pause and ask why, you break its rhythm. Awareness reveals how much of life is engineered around influence, from the news you read to the beliefs you inherit. Once you see the patterns, you can't unsee them. The illusion of fairness fades, and you realize that not everyone is playing the same game. Some are writing the rules, while others are just trying to survive them. But knowledge shifts power, and power begins with understanding. You'll notice that the system always rewards distraction. The louder the world gets, the harder it becomes to think clearly. That's intentional. Confusion creates compliance. When people are overwhelmed, they seek comfort, and the system sells it back to them in the form of convenience, entertainment, and validation. Awareness is quiet. That's why it's rare. The system isn't a single machine, it's a network of expectations. It runs on human behavior. The need to belong, to be seen, to feel secure. The moment you understand that, you stop hating it and start mastering it. You can't fight what you don't understand, but once you do, you can move within it without being consumed by it. To outsmart the system, you must detach from its bait. It will offer you recognition, urgency, comparison, all disguised as progress. But progress that costs you clarity is just disguised obedience. You must learn to recognize what's genuine and what's engineered. The ones who win are not the ones who resist every rule, but the ones who know which rules to rewrite. Every time you slow down and observe instead of react, you weaken the system's influence over you. You begin to notice patterns in people, in power, in yourself. You stop asking for permission to exist differently. You understand that real rebellion is internal. It's clarity that can't be manipulated. Once your mind is free, no system can own your choices. The greatest trick the system ever pulled was convincing people that freedom comes from fighting it. But freedom doesn't come from resistance. It comes from awareness. Fighting consumes energy. Understanding reclaims it. The more you observe, the less you absorb. That's how you begin to move beyond control, not with force, but with focus. When you stop seeing yourself as a victim of the system, you start seeing yourself as a strategist within it. You learn how to navigate rules without losing identity. You no longer need to break everything, you just need to bend nothing that breaks your peace. Awareness makes you ungovernable, not because you rebel, but because you can't be fooled. The system isn't your enemy, it's your teacher. It exposes your blind spots, tests your discipline, and challenges your awareness. It forces you to choose to conform or to think. Once you understand its design, you no longer fear it. You start seeing it as a structure you can walk through freely, untouched by the noise that once held you hostage. And that's where power begins, when you stop blaming a broken world and start mastering your place within it. The system was never broken. It was built to see who would wake up inside it. The question is no longer why it exists, it's whether you still need it to define you. Power used to belong to those who controlled resources, land, or armies. Today, it belongs to those who control attention. And the only defense against that control is awareness. The world has shifted from physical domination to psychological influence. People are not chained by force anymore. They're guided by distraction. Awareness is no longer just a virtue, it's survival. The less aware you are, the easier it is to be shaped by systems that profit from your unconsciousness. Awareness begins when you stop living on autopilot. It's when you start noticing the small things, the tone of a message, the emotion behind your impulse, the hidden intent in every offer. Most people react. Few observe. The difference between power and weakness lies in that gap between stimulus and response. Awareness is what fills that gap with clarity instead of confusion. The more aware you become, the less easily you're controlled. The system can manipulate emotion, but not observation. It can feed you narratives, but it can't rewrite your perception once you start questioning them. Awareness strips away illusion. It doesn't give you power over others. It gives you power over yourself. That's where real control begins. In every generation, awareness separates the leaders from the followers. Those who see clearly move with precision. Those who don't move with pressure. The system counts on your reaction. It thrives on speed and noise. But awareness slows you down just enough to see what's real. When you understand the mechanics of manipulation, you stop being part of its machinery. Awareness is not a trend. It's a weapon of clarity. It cuts through confusion and exposes motives. In a world designed to keep you emotional, awareness makes you analytical. You stop taking things personally because you see the pattern behind them. You begin to understand that most attacks aren't about you, they're about control. Once you see that, you stop giving your energy away. The powerful are not always the loudest, they're the most aware. They don't need to prove their strength, they just understand the game. Awareness allows you to step out of reaction mode and into observation mode. From there, you stop being the player and start becoming the one who reads the board. That's when life stops happening to you and starts responding to you. Every system, financial, political, digital, is built around attention. If they can't have your awareness, they can't influence your choices. That's why you're constantly being distracted, entertained, and outraged. Awareness is the act of pulling your focus back from everything that tries to steal it. It's mental sovereignty, the right to decide where your energy goes. The first stage of awareness feels uncomfortable. You begin to see the manipulation in marketing, the fear in politics, and the emptiness behind social validation. What once entertained you starts feeling shallow. What once inspired you starts feeling engineered. That's the moment you wake up, not because the world changed, but because your perception did. Awareness doesn't require genius. It requires honesty. It asks you to question your habits, your beliefs, your routines. It demands you stop defending illusions just because they feel safe. Most people fear awareness because it ruins comfort. But what's destroyed isn't peace, it's the illusion of peace. Real stability begins after the illusion ends. The more aware you become, the more patterns you start to see in conversations, in decisions, in people's behavior. You realize that most humans act out of fear, not logic. They avoid discomfort and chase approval. And systems are built to exploit that tendency. Awareness doesn't judge it, it just refuses to be controlled by it. Every time you become aware of a pattern, you take your power back. You stop falling for manipulation dressed as opportunity. You stop accepting narratives that serve someone else's gain. Awareness is quiet but effective. It doesn't shout. It exposes. The moment you see the design behind the deception, you can't unsee it. That's liberation. Power through awareness is subtle. It's the ability to stay calm when others panic, to think when others react. It's what allows you to respond strategically instead of emotionally. The more aware you are, the more invisible control becomes, and the less it works on you. You become immune to the traps that once dictated your choices. Awareness doesn't isolate you from the world, it integrates you into it with wisdom. You still move through the same systems, but now you see them from above instead of inside. You understand that freedom isn't about escape. It's about understanding the environment so deeply that you can navigate it without losing yourself. Those who lack awareness are easily directed by noise. They confuse motion with progress, emotion with truth, and validation with value. Awareness flips that entirely. You stop chasing results and start studying cause. You start noticing that behind every emotional trigger is a design, and when you see it, you choose not to play into it. Awareness is a mirror, not a shield. It doesn't protect you from chaos. It helps you move through it without getting pulled in. It's not about controlling everything, it's about understanding how everything works. Once you stop resisting awareness, you realize how much energy you wasted fighting what was meant to teach you. The system's greatest fear is a population that thinks critically. When people wake up, they stop reacting on command. They stop feeding fear and start feeding focus. Awareness turns consumption into observation, and observation into insight. The more aware you are, the less power propaganda, peer pressure, or fear have over you. Awareness also exposes your own patterns, not just the world's. It shows you how you self-sabotage, how you chase distractions, how you give away energy that wasn't earned. Awareness demands accountability. That's why it's not comfortable, because it makes you see yourself clearly. But only the self-aware can't be manipulated. Power in the modern world isn't about status, it's about perception. The ability to read a situation faster and deeper than others gives you an advantage no title can provide. Awareness allows you to move with purpose while others move with panic. It turns every interaction into information and every experience into strategy. Awareness transforms survival into intelligence. You no longer waste time fighting illusions or explaining truth to the blind. You move differently, calm, quiet, precise. The more aware you become, the less you need to prove, because understanding replaces reaction. Awareness turns chaos into data and confusion into clarity. Awareness isn't just power, it's protection. It shields you from manipulation, from impulsive emotion, from losing yourself in the noise. When you know how to see, you can't be deceived. When you know how to think, you can't be controlled. That's the new power, not dominance, not rebellion, but consciousness that nothing can program. Every system thrives on your participation. The moment you play by its rules, you reinforce its control. It doesn't need to win against you, it just needs you to keep showing up the way it expects. The real shift happens when you stop reacting to its moves and start designing your own. The people who rise above the noise aren't the ones who fight harder. They're the ones who stop playing the game altogether and build something different. The system sells competition as progress, convincing you that success means keeping up. It teaches you to measure your worth by comparison, not creation. You chase approval, applause, and validation, thinking they mean growth. But when you step back and look closer, you realize you've been running a race designed to exhaust you, not evolve you. The truth is, the system never feared rebellion, it feared independence. Walking away from their game doesn't mean giving up, it means waking up. It's realizing you can't win a game built to drain you. Every rule that feels limiting is a reminder that you're not meant to play by it forever. The system rewards predictability, but creativity thrives outside its borders. Once you stop chasing their rewards, you start defining your own success. They want you busy, emotional, and reactive because that's when you're easiest to steer. But when you detach, when you observe instead of obey, something shifts. You begin to see how power really works. You start moving with purpose, not pressure. Every system depends on your reaction. Take that away, and it starts to lose its strength. Creating your own game begins with awareness. You have to understand their rules before you can redesign them. You study the flow of power, not to copy it, but to outgrow it. The moment you stop needing validation from the system, you start seeing opportunities it never wanted you to notice. Freedom begins where permission ends. When you stop playing their game, people will call you difficult, arrogant, or lost. That's because your independence exposes their dependence. The ones who still need the system to feel safe will never understand the one who learned how to stand alone. But solitude is where strategy is born, where your clarity becomes your compass. You start creating quietly, away from the noise. You focus on building, not proving. You stop fighting for recognition because you've already recognized yourself. The system thrives on distraction, but your silence becomes your strength. When you stop competing, you start innovating. When you stop chasing, you start attracting. Every great shift begins when someone stops following the script. History remembers the ones who refused to play by the rules and instead rewrote them. They weren't lucky. They were aware. They saw how control worked and decided to design freedom differently. To stop playing their game is to choose consciousness over conformity. The game they built runs on emotion, fear, envy, urgency. Awareness interrupts all of them. When you no longer react to every signal the system sends, you become unpredictable. That unpredictability is power. Systems can't control what they can't anticipate. The moment you move with intent, you rewrite the rules without needing to announce it. The goal isn't to destroy their system, it's to create your own structure that outlasts it. You build networks, not hierarchies. You create with purpose, not panic. The system teaches obedience. Your new game teaches ownership. It's not about fighting back. It's about stepping up with clarity. When you stop playing their game, you also stop seeking fairness from it. You understand it was never built for your equality, it was built for efficiency. You stop waiting for systems to evolve and start evolving yourself. Your moves no longer depend on external approval. They depend on internal direction. That's how influence begins quietly, intentionally, and without permission. The system rewards those who fit in, but the world changes because of those who don't. Every innovation, every movement, every revolution started with someone who said, "I'm done playing by your rules." Creating your own game isn't rebellion, it's evolution. It's realizing you don't have to burn the structure down, you just have to rise above it. The hardest part of creating your own game is unlearning theirs. They taught you to rush, to compare, to conform. You must relearn patience, clarity, and purpose. The game you build won't give you instant gratification, it gives you real progress. You start to enjoy growth that no one else can measure, because it no longer depends on their scoreboard. At first, it feels lonely. You'll doubt yourself, question your direction, and wonder if walking away was a mistake. But as you keep building, silence turns into focus. The noise fades, and your work starts to speak for itself. The system measures noise, your game measures impact. That's the difference between attention and authority. You'll notice that when you stop playing their game, their rules no longer apply. The deadlines, the expectations, the social hierarchies, all of it starts to lose relevance. You begin living by design, not by default. You no longer need to fit in because you've built something that fits you. That's what freedom feels like, not escape, but alignment. Creating your own game doesn't mean avoiding discipline. It means choosing it consciously. You build your structure instead of inheriting one. You stop waiting for opportunities and start manufacturing them. You become both the player and the designer, accountable only to your purpose, not their applause. When you create your own game, failure becomes feedback, not defeat. You don't fear starting over because you know it's part of refinement. You stop living for outcomes and start living through awareness. You realize that success is not about control, it's about clarity. Every setback becomes information that sharpens your next move. You'll notice something strange. The system starts watching you. The same structure that once dictated your limits now studies your methods. That's the quiet irony of awareness. The moment you stop needing their approval, you become the model they can't replicate. Independence turns into influence. And in time, your new game becomes proof that power was never given, it was reclaimed. The day you stop playing their game isn't the end of rebellion, it's the beginning of creation. Because real power isn't about changing their rules, it's about building a world where you don't need them. Control is one of the most powerful illusions ever created. It makes people believe they're steering their lives while quietly guiding their choices behind the scenes. The system doesn't take your freedom by force, it gives you the illusion of control so you'll never question it. You make decisions that feel independent, but are often shaped by influences you don't even notice. Real control begins only when you start seeing how it actually operates. Everything around you is built to manage perception. Advertisements, politics, relationships, even ambition. They all play the same game. Guide attention, steer emotion, and call it control. The reason most people feel powerless is because they're trying to control the wrong things. They focus on outcomes, not awareness. They want to dominate events, but they've never mastered reaction. The illusion thrives in that blind spot. The system studies how humans behave, their fears, desires, and habits. It knows when to trigger urgency, when to promise comfort, when to sell hope. It doesn't need to force obedience when it can shape perception. You think you're choosing, but often you're reacting to cues designed to make you choose. True control begins the moment you stop being predictable. People chase control because uncertainty feels unsafe. They try to micromanage every detail, forcing life to match their expectations. But control, built on fear, always collapses. It's not real power. It's desperation disguised as discipline. The more you cling, the more fragile you become. Real control doesn't come from holding tighter. It comes from understanding the structure you're in. To understand control, you have to study influence. Influence is invisible power. It doesn't need authority to work. It lives in the way stories are told, the way information is framed, the way emotion spreads faster than truth. The system doesn't hide control in laws, it hides it in narratives. Once you learn to question them, you start seeing how subtle manipulation replaces open dominance. Control thrives where awareness is absent. The less you understand your triggers, the easier you are to lead. That's why most systems reward distraction. The more attention you spend outside yourself, the less you have left for reflection. When you're constantly reacting, you can't see the strings. Awareness cuts those strings one by one. Understanding control requires detachment. You can't see the system clearly while being emotionally invested in its approval. The moment you stop needing validation, the illusion starts breaking. You begin to see how much of what you thought was random is actually engineered. Control doesn't vanish. It just changes shape depending on who's paying attention. Most people mistake control for power, but they're not the same. Power is internal. Control is external. One expands your awareness, the other limits it. The system thrives when you focus on controlling what can't be changed: other people, circumstances, outcomes. But the person who masters self-control masters the system, because when you can't be provoked, you can't be programmed. The illusion of control also exists within the self. The mind convinces you that planning everything guarantees security, that overthinking equals awareness. But control built on anxiety only creates more chaos. You don't gain peace by predicting life. You gain it by knowing how to adapt. The most powerful form of control is flexibility, not rigidity. The system understands that fear is the fastest way to control behavior. Scared minds seek safety, and whoever provides it becomes the authority. Every crisis, every headline, every emotional hook serves that purpose, to make you react before you think. Awareness slows that process. It gives you space between fear and decision, and that space is freedom. Once you see how control works, it loses its power. You recognize the patterns: how influence hides in repetition, how authority hides in familiarity. You stop believing everything you hear simply because it feels true. You begin to test, observe, and decide with clarity. The moment you start questioning, manipulation turns into transparency. Control also feeds on conformity. The more people think alike, the easier they are to steer. The system doesn't care if you agree or disagree, as long as you keep arguing within its boundaries. It defines the sides, the topics, the limits, and watches both ends fight for the illusion of victory. True control lies not in taking sides, but in defining the sides themselves. When you learn how control operates, you stop chasing certainty. You realize that trying to dominate life is like trying to command the wind. Awareness teaches you to redirect energy instead of resisting it. You start guiding flow instead of forcing outcomes. That's what separates those who lead from those who react, understanding rhythm instead of fighting reality. Every power structure, from institutions to corporations, runs on psychological control. They study behavior, track patterns, and shape narratives. But they can't control awareness. Awareness can't be bought, censored, or conditioned, because it doesn't live in obedience, it lives in observation. The moment people start seeing clearly, control begins to fracture. You don't escape control by rejecting authority, you escape by mastering perception. The game isn't outside you, it's inside your mind. The more conscious you become of how emotions are used against you, the more resilient you grow. Control fails when you stop feeding it attention. Ignorance is the system's greatest ally. Awareness is its undoing. Real control feels effortless because it's based on understanding, not dominance. You don't need to fight to hold it. You move with calm precision because you understand timing, energy, and influence. While others react, you remain centered. That stillness is what makes awareness powerful. It's quiet, but it governs everything. The illusion of control ends when you accept that manipulation only works when you want something from it. The more desperate you are for certainty, approval, or belonging, the easier you are to steer. When you stop needing what the system offers, you break the cycle. That's not detachment, it's intelligence. The person who understands control doesn't seek to control others, they seek to master themselves. They know that chaos is inevitable, but confusion is optional. They don't fear instability because they know how to think within it. Awareness turns uncertainty into strategy and fear into focus. Control isn't about domination at all. It's about awareness. Once you see how the illusion works, you no longer fall for it. You stop chasing control and start embodying it. You become the calm in a world built on manipulation. Because the only true control you'll ever have is the kind that can't be taken. The control that comes from understanding. Obedience is sold as virtue, disguised as loyalty, and praised as stability. From a young age, you're taught that following rules keeps you safe, that compliance equals belonging. But no one tells you the price of unquestioned obedience. It's not your freedom they take first. It's your awareness. You stop asking why, stop noticing patterns, and start existing by someone else's design. That's how control becomes culture, through quiet compliance. The system doesn't need rebellion to test your strength. It needs obedience to measure your limits. It rewards you for conformity, not creativity. You get praised for following directions, even when those directions lead nowhere. The illusion of safety comes from knowing what's expected of you, not realizing that expectation is the cage itself. The comfort of rules blinds you to the cost of submission. At first, obedience feels easy. You don't have to think too much or question too deeply. You fit in, stay out of trouble, and feel accepted. But the longer you obey without awareness, the smaller your sense of self becomes. You start adjusting your thoughts to match the system's tone. You edit your identity to stay comfortable inside someone else's order. That's how individuality fades quietly, without resistance. People obey because disobedience feels dangerous. Society teaches you that questioning authority leads to punishment, rejection, or failure. So, you trade authenticity for approval. You convince yourself that it's smarter to stay silent than to stand out. But silence doesn't protect you, it erases you. Every time you obey against your truth, you shrink a little more until you no longer recognize who's making the decisions. The system thrives on this fear. It teaches obedience through reward paychecks, titles, praise, and disguises control as opportunity. You feel empowered while staying within boundaries someone else defined. That's the trick, to make you feel free while you're still following orders. Most people never question it because obedience feels easier than awareness. But comfort built on control isn't peace, it's sedation. You move through life without friction, but also without direction. When everything you do is guided by someone else's approval, you stop living and start performing. You become a character in a script you didn't write. That's why so many people feel exhausted, not because life is hard, but because they're living it by borrowed rules. True obedience isn't about following. It's about understanding. Blind obedience drains power, but conscious obedience uses it strategically. You can respect structure without surrendering yourself to it. You can cooperate without conforming. The world rewards predictability because it's easier to control. People who obey are stable. They don't question. They don't disrupt. They don't see beyond the frame. But obedience can never create innovation, only repetition. The future doesn't belong to those who follow orders. It belongs to those who write new directions. And that begins with courage, not compliance. There's a point where obedience becomes identity. You forget where their voice ends and yours begins. You follow rules that no longer make sense, traditions that no longer hold meaning, systems that no longer deserve trust. You start defending the very structures that limit you, because your sense of self has become tied to your submission. That's the quiet tragedy of obedience. Rebellion doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it's as simple as saying no when everyone else nods. It's refusing to participate in your own manipulation. It's walking away from a culture that demands conformity at the cost of consciousness. The system calls it arrogance. Awareness calls it freedom. The moment you start choosing your own thoughts, you stop being programmable. The danger of obedience is that it looks noble. It hides behind duty, morality, and professionalism. You're told you're being responsible, mature, disciplined, but really, you're being conditioned. True discipline isn't submission. It's self-command. When you act from awareness instead of fear, obedience becomes choice, not captivity. The system doesn't fear rebellion. It fears awareness inside obedience. It can handle noise but not clarity. You can obey rules and still outthink them. You can play the game and still understand its design. Once you see how authority works, you stop confusing obedience with loyalty. You don't need to fight every rule. You just need to know which ones deserve to be followed. Most people obey because they crave certainty. The unknown feels dangerous, but it's where freedom lives. When you stop obeying blindly, you step into uncertainty, and that's where your real identity starts forming. You begin to see how much of your personality was just a reflection of expectation. The fear fades when you realize the world doesn't collapse when you think for yourself. The hardest obedience to break is mental. It's when you stop needing external approval to validate internal truth. That's when obedience transforms into awareness, and awareness becomes freedom. You'll notice that when you stop obeying automatically, life feels uncertain, but alive. You begin to question everything, not to rebel, but to understand. You realize how much of your past was built on should instead of want. The system calls this dangerous because it loses control when you start defining meaning for yourself. Obedience feels safe until you see what it's costing you. Your time, your creativity, your authenticity. You were never meant to live by someone else's rhythm. When you start choosing your own, you stop fitting into their order, and that's when real life begins. The system will resist your freedom because your awareness threatens its design. But freedom doesn't need permission, it needs presence. Breaking away from obedience doesn't mean disrespect, it means discernment. You can listen without surrendering, learn without losing yourself. True maturity isn't doing what you're told, it's knowing when not to. Awareness makes obedience a tool, not a trap. It turns compliance into conscious choice. You can't truly own your life until you stop outsourcing your thinking. The people who rise are not the most obedient, they're the most observant. They see how power moves, when to align and when to walk away. They play the system smartly without letting it own their mind. That's the art of quiet rebellion, not chaos, but clarity. Obedience feels safe only because awareness feels risky. But once you experience awareness, you realize safety was never the goal, freedom was. You can't grow if you never question. You can't evolve if you always agree. The cost of blind obedience is invisible until it's too late, until you realize you've built a life that doesn't belong to you. And that's the truth. The system hides best that obedience isn't safety. It's surrender. The moment you start thinking for yourself, you stop being a part of someone else's control. You can still respect the world, but you no longer belong to it, because in the end, the safest place you can ever be is inside your own awareness. Rebellion is often mistaken for noise, for shouting, rejecting, or destroying what exists. But the most powerful rebellion doesn't fight with chaos. It moves with clarity. Strategic thinking is the rebellion the system never expects, because it can't be provoked by emotion or silenced by force. It's rebellion that wears discipline instead of defiance. It doesn't burn the structure down, it learns how to use its design to move unseen. The system thrives on impulsive reactions. It feeds on outrage, arguments, and emotional outbursts because they keep attention scattered. It knows how to absorb chaos and turn it into control. But what it can't digest is a calm, strategic mind. When you stop reacting and start observing, you become invisible to the system's manipulation. You're no longer playing its emotional game, you're rewriting the playbook. Strategic rebellion begins with patience. You stop wasting energy on proving you're different and start studying how things actually work. You understand that every rule, every policy, every unspoken hierarchy has a reason behind it. Instead of resisting everything blindly, you choose what to challenge and when. The system expects rage, it never expects restraint. When you think strategically, your silence becomes more dangerous than your noise. You're not ignoring, you're analyzing. You see the moves before they happen, and that awareness becomes your advantage. Real rebellion doesn't announce itself. It positions itself. It plans quietly, acts precisely, and lets the results speak louder than resistance ever could. Most people lose their power because they confuse emotion with strength. Anger feels powerful, but it's predictable. The system can manipulate predictable people. Strategic thinkers use emotion as fuel, not direction. They don't suppress their fire, they learn to aim it. That's what separates rebellion that fades from rebellion that changes everything. The true rebel doesn't waste time trying to prove the system wrong. They know exposure isn't the goal, evolution is. The game isn't about destroying power, but understanding how it circulates. The system can't stop someone who knows how influence moves, where decisions are made, and how to bend the structure without breaking themselves in the process. Strategic rebellion starts in the mind. It's the decision to stop reacting and start designing. You stop being a piece on the board and start becoming the one who reads it. You notice how others think, where they fall into patterns, and how they can be steered without realizing it. The quiet observer always outlasts the loud rebel. Thinking strategically doesn't mean losing passion, it means controlling its direction. You understand timing, when to speak, when to wait, and when to let silence work for you. Strategic people know that not every battle needs to be fought. Some are won by patience, others by positioning. They're not passive, they're precise. The system is built to absorb rebellion. It knows how to distract, divide, and discredit. But what it can't absorb is intelligence that moves without ego. Strategic rebellion is ego-free. It doesn't need recognition. It just needs results. That's why it survives where emotional rebellion burns out. You start realizing that every decision you make either strengthens the system or weakens it. The rebel who reacts is part of its energy loop. The thinker who observes breaks it. Strategy isn't resistance, it's redirection. You don't fight the system's rhythm. You use it to move your own way through it. That's rebellion disguised as grace. Strategic thinking requires clarity under pressure. It's easy to think when things are calm. But the real mastery is staying centered when chaos is engineered to test you. The system wants you emotional, impulsive, and reactive. The moment you stay logical in the face of manipulation, you've already won half the war. The intelligent rebel studies patterns instead of people. They learn to recognize systems of behavior, how influence spreads, how authority justifies itself, how fear shapes compliance. Once you can map those patterns, you don't need to fight them. You simply stop feeding them. That's what it means to outsmart power instead of oppose it. Strategic rebellion is not loud revolution. It's quiet evolution. It's changing how you think, how you respond, how you engage with influence. It's playing the long game while everyone else chases instant validation. When you think strategically, you stop rushing for victory and start building sustainability. That's real power, not a spark, but a steady flame. To think strategically is to understand leverage. You learn that energy, attention, and emotion are resources, and whoever controls them controls the outcome. You no longer waste time proving points. You focus on moving outcomes. The system plays emotionally, but strategy plays geometrically. Every move calculated, every step intentional. The real rebels are not the ones shouting in the streets. They're the ones designing systems that make the old ones irrelevant. They understand that power doesn't disappear, it transfers. So, instead of fighting for permission, they create alternatives. Strategic rebellion doesn't demand entry, it builds its own doors. A reactive rebel burns out fast because they fight everything. A strategic one endures because they know what's worth fighting. Not every rule is oppression, not every tradition is control. The rebel who understands context becomes unstoppable. They know that awareness is sharper than aggression. Strategic thinking also means playing unseen. The system watches for loud threats, not silent architects. When you move quietly, the structure doesn't know how to defend itself. That's why subtle rebellion is the most effective kind. It doesn't seek recognition, it seeks results. Rebellion becomes mastery when it's no longer about opposition but transformation. You stop needing to destroy the old when you've learned how to make the new. Strategy turns defiance into creation. It's how you move from fighting for freedom to designing it. The real rebellion isn't about control, it's about understanding. The world doesn't change because people yell at it. It changes because someone thinks better than it. Strategy is the evolution of rebellion that has learned patience, precision, and purpose. And that's the power the system can never predict. A mind that doesn't fight blindly, a rebel who doesn't burn out, and a thinker who doesn't need permission to move. Because when rebellion becomes strategy, control becomes irrelevant. Power doesn't always roar. It rarely announces itself or seeks attention. The strongest presence in any room is often the one that doesn't need to prove it's there. Silence carries a gravity that noise can't imitate. It doesn't compete for control, it already owns it. The louder someone tries to convince you of their power, the less they truly have. Real power moves quietly, because it doesn't need validation to exist. Silence is misunderstood in a world addicted to sound. People think being silent means being weak, detached, or uninvolved. But silence isn't absence. It's awareness. It's observation over reaction, focus over noise. Power grows in that stillness, because it's the only place where clarity has room to think. Those who master silence understand timing better than those who chase attention. Noise is how weakness hides its insecurity. The insecure need to be heard constantly, to remind others of their importance. But power doesn't beg to be seen, it's felt. Silence turns attention into observation and emotion into intelligence. When you stop talking to prove your point, your words begin to mean more when you finally use them. The system thrives on volume. It wants everyone shouting, reacting, and performing. It feeds off distraction, knowing that constant communication leaves no space for reflection. But silence breaks that pattern. It pauses the game. It stops the rhythm of manipulation and forces attention back to awareness. Silence is resistance that can't be argued with. Those who move in silence are never rushed. They don't need to announce what they're building or defend what they believe. They let results speak, not reactions. The most dangerous plans are often made quietly. And the most powerful people rarely explain themselves. Because once you understand energy, you realize that attention is currency, and silence is how you save it. When you stop responding to every provocation, you confuse the system. It expects emotion, not control. It's designed to make you defend yourself, to pull you into endless cycles of explanation and proof. But silence interrupts the loop. It tells the world, I don't need to justify what I already know. That calm is power the system can't decode. In silence, perception sharpens. You begin to notice what others miss: tones, expressions, motives, pauses. Words often lie, but energy never does. Silence helps you read between the lines. It gives you vision beyond surface distractions. The louder the world gets, the more valuable that clarity becomes. The ego hates silence because it can't control how it's perceived in it. It wants to fill every space, dominate every pause. But wisdom lives in restraint. When you stay silent, you reclaim control over your energy. You're no longer giving others access to your reactions. That's when presence becomes power, not through domination, but through composure. True leaders use silence strategically. They don't waste words trying to convince. They choose them to create impact. A single calm statement can shift a room more than a loud argument ever could. The secret isn't in saying less, it's in saying what matters when it matters. Silence trains you to value precision over performance. The system can manipulate emotions, but not stillness. It knows how to steer anger, fear, and urgency. But silence is unpredictable. It doesn't feed the loop, it breaks it. When you respond with silence instead of reaction, the system loses its grip. You've taken back control of the one thing it depends on, your attention. Silence also exposes truth. When you stop speaking, people reveal themselves. The insecure fill the space with noise, the manipulative scramble to maintain control, and the honest grow comfortable. Your silence becomes a mirror that shows what others are hiding. You don't have to expose anyone, awareness does it for you. In silence, you stop being performative. You're no longer trying to appear strong or wise. You simply are. That's what makes it powerful. The need to be seen is the first form of weakness. The ability to exist unseen is mastery. Silence isn't about hiding, it's about not needing to be found. Those who know how to move in silence carry authority without noise. Their actions are deliberate, their words rare but weighted. They don't fight for control because they already command respect. Power expressed loudly is fragile. Power expressed quietly is unshakable. It can't be argued with because it doesn't compete. Silence also protects strategy. The more you talk about your goals, the more interference you invite. Energy scattered through conversation loses its focus. Silence keeps your intentions pure, undiluted by opinion or doubt. The less you share prematurely, the more potent your results become. The system doesn't know how to handle what it can't read. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop being predictable. Silence makes others wonder what you know that they don't. It creates a quiet tension not built from fear, but from mystery. That mystery is leverage. It forces others to think twice before underestimating you. Moving in silence doesn't mean staying inactive. It means acting with awareness, not noise. You still move, but you do so without broadcasting it. You still speak, but only with purpose. You become deliberate with your presence, and that intentionality amplifies your influence. Power moves best when it's unseen, because it can't be stopped if no one can track it. You start realizing that silence isn't the opposite of power, it's the expression of it. It's how strength breathes. The louder the world becomes, the more valuable stillness turns. The mind that can stay quiet in noise becomes untouchable. That's not avoidance, it's mastery. Silence becomes your strategy. It stops being something you practice and becomes something you are. You no longer need to explain your worth or argue your truth. You carry certainty that doesn't need sound. The world may chase noise, but silence always wins because it never loses energy in the chase. Power isn't found in control or volume, it's found in presence. The quiet ones aren't disconnected. They're centered. They've learned that sound attracts attention, but silence commands it. They move differently, not because they need to prove strength, but because they've already become it. And that's the paradox the world can't understand. That silence isn't emptiness, it's depth. It's where thought becomes action, emotion becomes discipline, and control becomes invisible. Because real power doesn't need to be seen. It only needs to be understood. And silence is the language it speaks. Freedom doesn't disappear in chains, it disappears in the need to be liked. The moment you start living for other people's approval, you trade your authenticity for acceptance. It's subtle, almost invisible at first, because approval feels good. It gives you validation, comfort, belonging, but underneath, it rewires your choices. You stop doing what feels right and start doing what looks right. That's the slow death of freedom, dressed up as fitting in. The system was built on approval. It keeps you chasing it through grades, promotions, and applause. It teaches you early that being accepted means being safe. But that safety is borrowed. It only lasts as long as you obey expectations. Once you stop performing, the approval fades. And that's when you realize it was never real security, just emotional leverage disguised as love. When you live for approval, you lose awareness. You become addicted to being understood instead of being true. Every decision starts passing through the filter of, what will they think? The tragedy is that they are often people who don't even know themselves. Approval turns life into performance, and performance slowly replaces identity. Freedom starts when you stop negotiating your truth for validation. When you realize that peace of mind is more valuable than public applause. Approval can't fill the silence inside you. It can only distract you from it. The day you stop explaining your choices is the day you start owning them. That's when the mind starts breathing again without waiting for permission. Approval is control in disguise. It rewards your obedience and punishes your difference. You start bending your tone, softening your thoughts, and shrinking your truth so others stay comfortable. But comfort for others shouldn't cost you your authenticity. The more you conform, the less visible your real self becomes, until you start wondering who's actually living your life. Freedom doesn't come from rebellion alone. It comes from awareness. You can't be free while your worth still depends on someone else's reaction. Approval keeps you chasing mirrors, reflections of yourself through other people's eyes. But mirrors distort. They never tell the whole truth. Awareness teaches you to stop performing for reflection and start living for connection. Most people confuse approval with love. They think being liked means being valued. But approval isn't love, it's comfort. It's acceptance with conditions. The moment you outgrow those conditions, the affection turns cold. Freedom means learning to be at peace, even when no one claps. It's realizing that silence isn't rejection, it's clarity. Approval culture keeps you trapped in emotional debt. You start feeling responsible for how others feel about your choices. You over-explain, over-apologize, over-give. But you can't control perception, and trying to will only exhaust you. The ones who truly respect you won't need your performance. They'll recognize your truth. Everyone else was just an audience, not an ally. Freedom begins the day you stop performing. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's quiet, calm, and real. It's the moment you start saying no without guilt and yes without fear. You stop dressing your truth in soft words to make it acceptable. You realize that if your authenticity offends someone, they were never aligned with you in the first place. Approval is currency in the system of control. It's how society keeps people manageable. The more you need it, the easier you are to guide. But when you stop depending on it, you become unpredictable, and that's what real power looks like. They can't threaten you with disapproval when it no longer matters. When approval no longer controls you, peace replaces performance. You stop competing with people who were never your competition. You stop seeking validation from those who can't see your vision. Freedom isn't isolation. It's alignment. You start choosing spaces that match your growth instead of forcing yourself into rooms that limit it. Freedom doesn't ask for followers. It asks for honesty. It's not about standing against everyone. It's about standing with yourself. The system fears those who no longer need its praise because approval is its quiet form of control. The moment you stop needing to be liked, you become untouchable. There's strength in being misunderstood. It means you're no longer shaping yourself to fit smaller minds. It means you've stopped explaining your depth to those who only see surfaces. Approval makes you predictable. Freedom makes you mysterious. People can't categorize what no longer seeks to please. The path to freedom is uncomfortable because you lose company along the way. Some will call you arrogant, cold, or distant, but that's projection. They're not angry at your independence. They're scared of what it reminds them of their own unclaimed freedom. Growth will always look like rebellion to those who never questioned their obedience. You'll notice that when approval ends, clarity begins. Decisions become simpler because they're no longer filtered through fear. You don't ask, will they understand? You ask, does this align? That one shift changes everything. You stop living to be accepted and start living to be authentic. Approval addiction is hard to break because it's tied to belonging. But freedom gives you a different kind of belonging. One that doesn't depend on anyone else's permission. You start connecting with people who don't need you to shrink. That's how you build community without conformity. True freedom is quiet confidence. It's walking into a room without adjusting yourself to fit its energy. It's speaking truth without rehearsing it. It's existing without defending it. When you no longer trade authenticity for acceptance, you start attracting people who respect your boundaries instead of testing them. Freedom begins when you stop explaining your piece, when you stop trying to convince others that your choices make sense. Approval is borrowed energy. Freedom is self-generated. You no longer need applause to feel alive. Your validation becomes internal, and that's what keeps you grounded when the world tries to shake you. The world teaches that belonging comes from being chosen. Awareness teaches that belonging comes from choosing yourself. Approval gives temporary relief. Freedom gives permanent alignment. The more you live by truth, the less you need applause to survive. That's when you start living not as someone's version of you, but as your own. You realize that approval was the smallest prison of all, invisible, comfortable, and familiar. You were never trapped by walls, just by the fear of being disliked. The moment you let that fear die, you meet freedom raw, quiet, and complete. Because nothing in the world is stronger than a mind that no longer needs permission to exist. Every system that exists, political, corporate, social, or digital, is a machine. It's built to move in patterns, reward compliance, and punish unpredictability. Most people spend their lives trying to fight it head-on, using emotion against architecture. But machines don't respond to emotion, they respond to design. The secret isn't in fighting them, it's in decoding them. The ones who understand how they work can move through them untouched, while everyone else gets consumed trying to destroy them. The machine thrives on resistance, because resistance feeds it energy. Every time you rage against it, you become part of its cycle. Outrage is a resource the system knows how to monetize, redirect, and weaponize. The more you react, the stronger it grows. But when you study it, observe it, and understand how it manipulates movement, you weaken its control. You stop being a player and start becoming the programmer. Decoding means watching patterns instead of reacting to them. The machine operates through repetition. It learns from what triggers you. It sells you distraction wrapped in progress, and compliance wrapped in convenience. Once you notice the rhythm, you can step outside of it. The goal isn't to destroy the machine, but to understand its code so deeply that you can operate freely within it. The system wants you emotional, impulsive, and predictable. It feeds on attention, not awareness. That's why fighting it rarely works. It knows how to weaponize your anger. But the moment you go quiet and start thinking strategically, you disappear from its radar. You're no longer data, you're direction. The machine can't control what it can't measure. Every machine hides its purpose behind comfort. It gives you shortcuts, convenience, and rewards that slowly replace your autonomy. You start trading effort for ease, presence for stimulation, and individuality for inclusion. But decoding means questioning the cost of comfort. What does the machine take in exchange for the illusion of simplicity? The answer is almost always your attention, the most valuable resource it can own. When you stop fighting and start decoding, you shift from emotion to analysis. You start seeing how systems communicate through trends, updates, metrics, and manipulation. You notice how everything is designed to keep you consuming, not creating. Awareness becomes your firewall. It filters what enters your mind and decides which commands you accept. The machine doesn't need to convince you. It only needs to distract you. It doesn't care if you agree or disagree. Both reactions generate data. When you fight it, you feed it. When you study it, you outsmart it. Freedom begins when you stop feeding systems that survive on your attention. The less they know what motivates you, the more unpredictable and therefore powerful you become. Every algorithm, every institution, every authority has a pattern of control. The machine repeats these patterns because most people never pause long enough to see them. Decoding is about pattern recognition, about noticing how systems recycle the same forms of influence through different names. Once you see repetition, you also see opportunity, what others call oppression. You start calling information. The smart don't rebel against the machine. They use it. They learn its structure, understand its dependencies, and build parallel systems that bypass it entirely. They move through it like water, through cracks, unnoticed but unstoppable. That's how true innovation happens, not through destruction, but through redirection. Decoding allows creation where resistance only breeds exhaustion. The machine is efficient because it runs on human behavior. It knows your impulses better than you do, but awareness breaks that automation. When you start paying attention to how you react, what triggers you, and why you follow certain patterns, you stop being programmable. Self-awareness is the first step in decoding everything outside you. Fighting the machine drains energy. Decoding it builds intelligence. The rebel exhausts themselves trying to change the rules. The strategist learns how to use them. The system expects confrontation but not observation. That's why thinkers outlast fighters. Strategy, not defiance, is what exposes the system's weak points, and those weak points always exist. Every machine has vulnerabilities, but you can't see them when you're emotional. You have to detach long enough to think clearly. Anger makes you predictable. Curiosity makes you invisible. The moment you stop reacting and start studying, you begin to see what the system fears most: individuals who can't be manipulated through emotion. Decoding the machine also means understanding yourself as part of it. You can't analyze what you deny being connected to. Your habits, attention, and desires are inputs that keep it running. When you change your internal programming, your routines, your consumption, your focus, you stop feeding the loop. You become the glitch it can't fix. The machine doesn't need villains. It needs dependence. It creates systems of reward that make you crave validation from it. Whether it's social recognition, digital feedback, or professional approval, the mechanism is the same. Once you understand how reward replaces freedom, you can start building your own metrics for success, ones the system can't define or take away. Decoding isn't rebellion, it's mastery. You don't waste time trying to convince the machine to be fair. You learn how to make it irrelevant. You find backdoors, not battles. You understand timing, not tension. Awareness turns control into choice. When you know how the machine thinks, you no longer need to fear it. To decode is to detach without disconnecting. You still exist inside the system, but you're no longer owned by it. You observe trends without chasing them, follow rules without being ruled, and adapt without losing yourself. The machine still moves, but now it moves around you instead of through you. People fear the machine because they see it as invincible. But even the most complex systems depend on simple truths: attention, compliance, and repetition. Remove one of those, and the structure weakens. Decoding helps you identify which lever matters most. Sometimes, power doesn't need to be confronted, it just needs to be outthought. Fighting leads to noise, decoding leads to knowledge. The more you understand, the less you need to resist. You start conserving energy, focusing only on what influences outcomes. The system runs on reaction, and every moment of patience breaks its rhythm. Stillness is not surrender, it's strategy. The machine hides its influence behind language. It rebrands control as progress, dependency as convenience, and distraction as entertainment. But language is also the first code you can crack. When you learn to read between words, to see meaning behind messaging, you become fluent in awareness. That literacy is armor in a world that runs on persuasion. Once you decode the system, you stop being angry at it. You understand that it's not evil, it's efficient. It's designed to serve those who understand it and exploit those who don't. That's why awareness is the ultimate rebellion. It doesn't destroy the system, it outgrows it. The more you see, the less it owns you. The quietest form of power is comprehension. When you truly understand how something functions, it can't manipulate you anymore. You stop fighting rules and start rewriting them. The world still spins the same. But now you move differently. Aware, grounded, deliberate. You're no longer reactive data. You're conscious direction. Decoding turns chaos into patterns and control into information. You stop labeling everything as good or bad and start asking how and why. Every system reveals itself to those who stop shouting long enough to listen. The machine doesn't hide its code, it just hides it behind noise. Silence is how you access it. The machine will always evolve, but so will awareness. The key isn't to escape it, but to move faster in understanding than it does in manipulation. You don't win by destroying. You win by decoding, adapting, and transcending. Awareness gives you the agility that resistance never could. Decoding the machine is about reclaiming authorship. You stop letting systems write your story and start programming your path. You no longer fear control because you understand how it operates. The ones who decode don't just survive the system, they design what comes after it. And that's where real freedom begins. Not in fighting the machine, but in knowing it so well that it can no longer recognize you as part of its code. The system's control has never been absolute, it's psychological. It only works as long as you react to its triggers. The moment you master your inner world, the system loses its grip. It can influence the masses, but not the mind that governs itself. Mastery isn't about dominance over others. It's about discipline over your reactions. The world stops controlling you the day you stop being predictable. Self-mastery begins with awareness of how easily you're pulled. Every distraction, every temptation, every pressure to conform reveals where control still lives. The system feeds on your impulses, the need to prove, defend, or belong. Once you learn to pause before reacting, you cut its strings. You start seeing manipulation not as offense, but as data, and data can only control what doesn't understand itself. The strongest weapon you can build is emotional intelligence. The system runs on emotion: fear, anger, envy, urgency. When you master emotion, you master energy. You decide what deserves a reaction and what doesn't. Power doesn't lie in silence alone. It lies in selective expression. When you choose when to move, speak, or engage, you become a strategist, not a subject. Mastery doesn't come from avoiding chaos, it comes from moving through it without losing your alignment. You can't control what happens around you, but you can control how much of it enters you. Once you learn to separate stimulus from response, noise from signal, the system loses its favorite weapon: confusion. Clarity is the ultimate act of rebellion. The system can manipulate habits more easily than thoughts. That's why mastery requires discipline. Every routine, every reaction, every decision becomes a chance to reclaim control. You don't break the system by shouting at it. You weaken it every time you choose awareness over impulse. Discipline turns chaos into pattern, and pattern turns into power. Self-mastery isn't a performance, it's a process. It doesn't happen in grand moments, but in quiet choices when you decide to pause instead of react, to reflect instead of blame. The system can measure noise, not silence. It can predict reaction, not awareness. That's why your restraint becomes its blind spot. You disappear from its control by mastering your own rhythm. The first thing mastery teaches you is responsibility. You stop blaming systems, people, or luck for what happens. You understand that awareness doesn't remove obstacles, it removes dependence. You can't change everything, but you can always change how you meet it. That's the point where power turns inward and becomes untouchable. When you master yourself, you stop needing the system's rewards. You no longer crave approval, attention, or validation. Those are the currencies it uses to buy your obedience. Once you learn to value peace over praise, you're free. You can move inside the structure without being shaped by it. That's true independence control without confinement. Self-mastery gives you patience. You stop rushing results and start respecting timing. The system runs on speed, the constant pressure to react, consume, decide. But patience breaks that cycle. It gives you time to observe, to plan, to act deliberately. Every moment you take to think is a threat to systems that depend on your thoughtlessness. The more you master yourself, the more invisible you become to manipulation. Marketing loses its grip, gossip loses its appeal, and pressure loses its bite. You start to see how much of modern control depends on emotional dependency. Once you detach from external chaos, you move through it like a storm's eye, calm, aware, untouchable. Self-mastery isn't isolation, it's alignment. You don't disconnect from the world, you engage with precision. You know what to give energy to and what to ignore. That balance makes you effective, not exhausted. The system drains those who react to everything. But when you master your focus, you manage your freedom. The system studies weakness. It tests where you'll bend your comfort, your pride, your fear of loss. The person who knows their weaknesses disarms those tests. Self-mastery is self-audit. You learn what triggers you, and then you train it. The less you hide from your flaws, the less control they hold. Awareness turns vulnerability into armor. When you know yourself deeply, you can't be bribed or blackmailed by external forces. You can't be manipulated by fear when you've accepted discomfort as part of growth. You can't be controlled by flattery when your worth is self-defined. Mastery makes you immune to emotional currencies that the system uses to buy obedience. You start realizing that mastery isn't about perfection, it's about control under pressure. You still feel, still fail, still stumble, but you recover faster. You process before reacting, think before deciding. Each mistake becomes a mirror instead of a wound. That's how awareness turns pain into intelligence. The world rewards reaction because reaction fuels attention. But attention is power, and power is currency. When you stop giving it away freely, you change the economics of control. Self-mastery makes your attention expensive. You stop lending it to what doesn't build you. The less you react, the richer your awareness becomes. The system loses its leverage the moment you stop needing what it offers. It can't tempt you with comfort or threaten you with loss when your peace doesn't depend on either. That's the paradox of control. When you stop needing to control everything, you gain control over yourself. Detachment isn't coldness, it's clarity. Mastery teaches emotional minimalism, the ability to feel fully but respond selectively. You start realizing how few things truly deserve your energy. Every argument avoided, every impulse resisted, every silence chosen. Those are victories that the world never sees but the self always feels. That's the quiet power of control from within. Self-mastery demands awareness of time. You stop spending your hours on reaction and start investing them in intention. You realize that every minute of attention is either strengthening the system or strengthening yourself. The more intentional your focus becomes, the more independent your mind gets. Time mastery is mind mastery. When you master yourself, chaos turns into context. Instead of being overwhelmed, you start decoding. Problems become patterns, and patterns become opportunities. You stop taking everything personally because awareness has taught you to see systems behind emotions. Understanding replaces frustration, and calm replaces control. The person who knows themselves doesn't seek permission. They move from clarity, not approval. They don't explain peace to noise or justify stillness to chaos. That kind of internal power doesn't make you distant, it makes you decisive. You stop needing to be understood because understanding yourself is enough. Self-mastery redefines strength. It's not about resistance but balance, the ability to stay centered while the world shifts. You no longer fight everything around you because nothing inside you is fighting anymore. That's the essence of unshakable control. Peace that can't be provoked. When you master yourself, even pressure becomes information. You start seeing tension as feedback, a message about what still unsettles you. Each test becomes a tool. Every challenge becomes a mirror that shows how stable your awareness really is. The system tries to break your focus, but mastery turns focus into foundation. Mastery also makes you unpredictable. The world can't anticipate someone who doesn't react in expected ways. Systems depend on behavioral patterns. You break them by thinking differently. When you no longer operate on instinct, but on intention, manipulation fails. You're no longer a participant in control, you're a variable it can't calculate. You understand that the real battlefield was never external. It was always between your awareness and your emotion, between your discipline and your impulse. The system could only use what it could provoke. Once you stop feeding it reaction, you starve its power. Self-mastery doesn't fight control. It ends its relevance. Mastery is not about superiority. It's about sovereignty. It's realizing that no system, person, or circumstance can truly own you once you know how to own yourself. The world may keep spinning in chaos, but you move with direction. Because when you've mastered your mind, the system has nothing left to take. Freedom doesn't begin when the system ends. It begins when you stop being controlled by it. You realize the game was never about power, it was about psychology. The system only wins when it knows how to pull your emotions faster than you can think. But once you master your mind, it loses the map. You stop reacting to the world and start directing it. That's not rebellion, that's evolution. You were never meant to destroy the system. You were meant to understand it, to read its language, to move within it without being owned by it. When you stop fighting blindly, you begin to see the code beneath the noise. And once you can see the code, you can rewrite your role inside it. That's how true freedom begins, not through escape, but through awareness. Every rule you've outgrown becomes a tool in your favor. Every manipulation you've decoded turns into insight. You no longer need to scream to be heard or fight to be seen. The real strength is subtle, it's knowing when to act. when to wait, and when to walk away. Mastery isn't about control over others, it's control over yourself. Freedom isn't the absence of structure. It's the ability to move through it without losing who you are. You still work, you still build, you still play the game, but now, the game no longer plays you. You've learned how to use the system without letting it use your peace. That's not rebellion for show, that's leadership in silence. And when you finally reach that point when noise no longer distracts you, when manipulation no longer moves you, when fear no longer controls you, you'll understand what it means to truly own your freedom. The system doesn't end. You just rise above its reach. You've stopped being a piece on the board and started becoming the one who designs the moves. That's where real liberation lives, not in escape, but in awareness so sharp that nothing can trap you again. Because the mind that knows itself cannot be controlled. It doesn't need approval, it doesn't fear consequence, and it doesn't chase validation. This is the quiet revolution the world never sees coming. A generation that doesn't fight the system with noise, but rewires it with understanding. And if you've reached this point, you've already begun.